Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. Today we're going to do a quick dive into what threat hunting is. So jumping right into it, our definition from a SANS paper we wrote a few years back that Mark Seitz and I wrote, threat hunting is the proactive analyst-driven process to search for attackers, TTPs within your environment. And this is the definition we're going to start with. We're going to break down each component of this to really help you understand why we went with this definition and why we think it's really the ideal definition for threat hunting. So starting with that first side, proactive. So threat hunting fits kind of in that prevention and detection spectrum. Depending on how you do it, it's going to be one way or the other. And what I mean by that is if you're doing threat hunts that are generating recommendations that your organization or whatever network you're defending is using to go ahead and fix that, the outcome of that threat hunt is actually heavily on the prevention side. A lot of people, though, kind of stay on the detection side where they're just like, hey, we're going to treat threat hunting as a detection activity where we're going to use TTPs and we're going to use maybe approaches that we think might be getting around defenses to look for that. A good threat hunt really will cover both the prevention and the detection side. And it's really important to consider both sides when you are threat hunting. The prevention side will recommend, like I said, those additional safeguards that you can do. And the detection side really should differ from incident response, right? If you detect something, that'll kick off incident response. How you do incident response, the timetables, the process is going to generally be different from threat hunting. So when we say threat hunting is proactive, it's because it's covering both that prevention and detection side. Now, hopping into the analyst-driven side, threat hunting is going to be assisted by people, process, and technologies, the whole part of your security program. It's not just going to be one component of this. So, you can't just use people, you can't just use process. If you're just using technology to threat hunt, and it's already your detection technology, then really you're just doing detection, right? So when we talk about it being analyst-driven, we're adding that human into the activity, and that human often can add logic that some of the other systems can't see possibly, that some of your automated tools might not see. It goes beyond that in-place prevention or detection devices, right? So a good threat hunt's going to consider, hey, this is where my network's strong, this is where my network's weak, this is where my visibility is strong and weak, and this is where I know we have good monitoring or that we have good stuff in place. So if you know only a certain portion of your network's looked at, or even if you're only looking at using something like network traffic to where, hey, you're like, hey, encrypted traffic's coming through, all of this other data is coming through that I can't see, threat hunting might be used to kind of go beyond that detection gap that you have, because again, you have a visibility gap possibly that you know about there. So the analyst-driven side, when we talk about that, it's human-driven, and there's an advantage there because the attacker also, right, a lot of times is a human. And while the attacker can plan for the defenses you have in place, it's harder for an attacker to actually plan for, hey, what is a human threat hunter going to do? So there's a lot of benefit actually for threat hunting being analyst-driven, being human-driven, and also assisted by technology. So the human's also not going to replace the technology. As your hunt grows, you're going to need both good humans and both technologies to scale for it. And finally, as we get towards the end of the threat hunting definition, we talk about searching for those tactics, techniques, and procedures in the environment. These are kind of the breadcrumbs or the footprints that the attacker might leave going through your network. A lot of organizations, and if you look at other definitions a lot of other people put on this, they'll talk about looking for that activity that evades existing safeguards. So certain endpoint detection and response companies will say, hey, threat hunting is actually looking for what our EDR tools won't see or can't see or might not have coverage of in your network. These TTPs could include those known TTPs associated with threats, right? So when you talk about a threat hunt being threat intel driven, that threat intel is informing the TTPs that you're looking for. You might anchor a threat hunt on a specific actor. So you might see, hey, APT 29, APT 34, You might say a geo region, you might say an industry. There's a lot of different ways you can frame the threat side on this. It can even be insider threats. So if you know, like, hey, these are the common tactics an insider threat works in my industry, that might be something also that's a known TTP that you do. The other side of threat hunts that some people discount, some people don't see as much weight in this, but it's equally important, is the possible TTPs based on this environment, right? So we talked about how threat intel could be, or how threat hunting could be proactive earlier. The other proactive portion is understanding, hey, I know what tools are in my environment. I know what software is in my environment. And so when I start to hear about vulnerabilities, or when I start to say, hey, an attacker might not realize that this, this vulnerable application's here, maybe it has default passwords, maybe it has some other weakness in it, you can say, hey, based on kind of the open box view I have of my network, I'm going to start to do a threat hunt for maybe, those vulnerabilities that I haven't seen someone use yet on the network, but that I know might be used in my network. And so in bringing these in, it actually helps you understand your network a bit more as you go through. So very quickly, approaches to threat hunting also varies with the definition. So you'll see different people define threat hunting differently. In a lot of ways also, their definitions will kind of vary around approaches. We try to keep an agnostic approach with our definition because threat hunting might use existing host and network resources, right? So if you have that endpoint detection and response, that EDR, a lot of people are going to hunt in there. A lot of people are going to hunt in their threat or elk stack. A lot of people might hunt with their network tools if they're using something like Zeek or Corelight or other network monitoring tools. So threat hunts, like I said, may be an extension of those tools. Threat hunts might also bring in raw and host data, or raw host and network data. So on the host side, you might bring in disk images, you might bring in Windows event logs, you might bring in even memory. And on the network side, right, you might bring in raw PCAP, DNS logs, firewall logs. And so all of this data really does support threat hunts well. And it's important that when you're looking at different threat hunt options to understand, like, okay, well, where are they drawing their decision and what are they going to use? Because oftentimes this will change when someone's saying, hey, this is what threat hunting is. Their definition might anchor around a certain ported data, but our definition is to try to keep it wide open so it covers all of those data sets. As I said, with a threat hunt, it's important to consider overlap with other defenses. If you're just threat hunting in Splunk, it's possible that your other detection rules or your other things, your other detection logic in your environment, you're actually overlapping that. So you're not actually going to get much benefit from your threat hunt because you're eating out of the same data the other thing's using. And especially if Splunk or whatever your SIEM does have a visibility gap, your threat hunt's going to inherit that same visibility gap. Likewise with the overlap, considering your overlap, like I said, can help you identify those opportunities to say, hey, this is what I know is what's monitored on my network. I'm going to design my threat hunt to work around that. Threat hunt might cover those limitations or the blind spots of existing defenses. So thanks for joining in this week. This was a quick video on what threat hunting is. And yeah, we hope to see you next week.